Saying is that I've got no presentation, it's just a talk track. I am an employee of Microsoft for the past 7 years. And so for the past 7 years, I've been involved in a variety of AI projects, and my last two roles have been AI specific, and I'm now focused on Azure OpenAI. Um, and typically, throughout the entirety of my career, I've trodden a path where I have one foot in the business and one foot in the technology, and I've acted in some way, shape, or form as an intermediary for those two kind of communities or kind of groups of people. And at university, I studied cognitive science. So often when I think of what is artificial intelligence, I'm also thinking about what is actual intelligence. So I really like what our last speaker was saying, because we are in the midst of a hype cycle. But that doesn't mean that the technology, the AI technologies, Gen AI technologies are not incredibly powerful tools, but there is this feeling that people are wanting to apply this tool as some kind of magic bullet that will fix all things and imbue it with special magical capabilities. But this is the essence of my talk. So artificial intelligence, as an idea, broadly speaking, came about in the late 50s and 60s. Between, say, what theories that people developed and the experiments that people run in the 50s and 60s to when I joined university and I was drawing my neural networks on a whiteboard with the weightings and passing kind of the ideas through, to now, the biggest thing that's really changed is access to data and the vast increase in compute. So with regards to theory and new discoveries, if we're brutally honest, not a massive amount has changed. But nonetheless, that ability to apply theory and to experiment more readily has meant we have discovered interesting new capabilities. And one of those in particular is this transformer idea. So what you'll have seen from OpenAI with GPT, the so-called Gen AI, it is a super interesting capability. And this is where AI and Gen AI, probably it's worthwhile separating them slightly as content, because it's Gen AI that's generating the hype. AI is already really embedded into the world, delivering useful outcomes, transforming, medicine, ops, sales, websites, retail, everything. It's infused everywhere that you can imagine. Now, Gen AI creating this hype cycle means that all of a sudden there's a proliferation of so-called experts, but equally then there's this raising of expectations, and there is a lot of potentially overselling of the actual capabilities. But not so much the capabilities, because Gen AI and AI in general can absolutely deliver on all of those things that it promises. But I think the thing that is seemingly being glossed over at this point in time is the amount of work required to make those things work. So I'm firmly of the belief that we're at a point in time where there's this like arms race between the major cloud providers and potentially some nation states to build ever larger LLMs. But we're probably reaching this point of plateau with regards to how much more of a beneficial outcome can an LLM provide just by feeding it masses of more data. And where I think there's going to be far more interesting developments will be in the improvement of the tying of those models to people's private repositories of data. So I'm far more interested in things like SLMs, the small language models, which are cheaper, faster, and more likely to deliver a beneficial outcome. But I'm also very interested in things like the agentic model. So I'm happy to provide some resources post-talk where people can access some content on things like AutoGen as an example. So I'll provide like a Git repo so you can actually access where people are doing this research. But what we're seeing is with the agentic model is the ability for these models to orchestrate between themselves and outperform an LLM. And equally, what we're seeing is when it's domain specific, which has got to be more valuable than typical general purpose, is an SLM also will generally be more accurate and outperform an LLM. Now, I think because there's all this, there's this almost this kind of race to win the AI, the AI wars, let's call them. There is this driving need to ensure that businesses are treating the adoption of AIs and Gen AI technologies with the appropriate kind of care that it demands. Because, like I said, I think the key problem that I'm witnessing is that too many people are expecting it to be a magic bullet. So you just buy Copilot as an example, and you just deploy it to your business, and you think that's it, it's going to work. But these technologies are like every other technology on the planet. It's binary, it either works or it doesn't. The thing that brings beneficial outcomes to a business when they deploy a new technology is people adopting that technology, is people making that technology part of their day-to-day. So what I'm really wanting to see during these kind of next few years in the evolution of the technologies is people being far more intentional around the way in which they think the use cases they develop are going to be answered by these technologies. And so what people need to do is stop thinking about these things as being these magical capabilities, and think of them more as there's a technology with a capability and a capacity. It comes at a cost. If I am to apply it to particular use cases around optimization in the back end or potentially increasing frontline sales on the front end, like be really explicit around the use case, the business case you're trying to solve for. And once you've deployed it, actually go back and find out if it's solving those problems for you. Because what we're going to start to see is the potential for a few interesting problems, right? So most of these large cloud providers will have various ESG style statements being made around the energy efficiency of their data centers, but training these LLMs will cost hundreds of millions in electricity bills, right? And it's a massive problem, kind of energy consumption in data centers and for these massive cloud providers in general. So what we're also starting to discover is that if we're just going to be wholly reliant upon training the LLMs on publicly available data, and as we know, there's a continual growth and proliferation of new data on the internet, what's potentially going to start to happen, and people are starting now to talk about this, is the collapse of these LLMs, because they will start to be consuming their own content, because there'll be an exponential increase in the amount of Gen AI created content being landed on the internet. And so if it's just consuming its own content, then that can actually start to massively degrade its accuracy and capability to do the things that it currently does. So far more attention needs to be paid to the curation of the data sets and to doing the kind of the legwork in that data science stage. Now, I guess the other thing I wanted to mention around an LLM is the fact that people often like to talk about the fact that it understands language. In particular, language is the kind of the key primary use case, but there are obviously different models to deal with image creation or now even video creation. But if we're to stick with language, like it doesn't understand language. An LLM is nothing more than still the same as everything else, advanced mathematical statistics. And all that it's happening in the back end is imagine like a graph existing in 3D space, and every word has a mathematical probability with strength of relationship to that word. And so when I input things into like a GPT style capability and it gives me a response, ultimately what it's doing is calculating what is the next most likely word that I should present back that makes it make sense. So where I think the real value is going to start to come from this Gen AI space is when people start to look at data sets that live behind a firewall. Because if you're looking at data sets that live behind a firewall, and so they are going to be domain specific, and it might be around retail, it might be around manufacturing, it might be around healthcare, all of a sudden, then the application of that SLM or LLM to that domain becomes extremely valuable because immediately I'm ensuring that I'm reducing that capability for hallucination. Um, but then I'm starting to eliminate that potential that it's not going to be of benefit to me. Because if I make it domain specific, that's where you're going to start to see a lot of the kind of rewards. And so even though it's early stage, even when it was LLMs, like incredible examples that cropped up might be, a young child was been going to the doctor for years, and the doctors gave them lots of tests, and they were unable. General practitioning is extremely difficult, but a general practitioner wasn't able to identify what the problem was. When GPT arrived from OpenAI, the parents were able to input all of the symptoms into GPT, and GPT actually gave them an accurate diagnosis for what the problem likely was. So, whilst I'm saying that there are all these potential pitfalls and problems with LLM, there are also incredible outcomes that can be delivered if people are to apply them properly in terms of do the due diligence with the rollout. There are clearly security concerns, and I think those security concerns that we've seen crop up in the mass market have been born of people not applying the same standards they would from a security perspective that they would to any other product. So there were things like, I don't know, like a DPD or a parcel force style service, an LLM, like basically their chatbot being convinced to badmouth their own business. Or there was maybe, I think it was Chevrolet, but a major car brand had their chat GPT style model published, and a consumer was able to convince the bot to sell a car for $1. Now, all of those things just happen because people haven't applied the right guardrails. And for the most part, those guardrails exist and they're published, so people don't have to necessarily invent their own. But there is still a need to ensure that there is due care and attention when you're deploying these kinds of technologies. So, key things here, because we're starting to see lots of POC starting to tick over and become enterprise ready kind of applications and use cases. And we're going to start to see that accelerate. And really what people need to do when they're thinking about deploying an AI technology into their business is thinking about not only like what are the capabilities that this is going to introduce, but like what kinds of capabilities do I need within my workforce? Like what kind of training do I need to put my people on? To what degree do I need to ensure that there is adoption of these capabilities within my workforce and that people are upskilled and cross-skilled, etc.? Because if we are to leave people behind when it comes to the deployment of these technologies, then the technologies are really not going to provide anywhere near the benefit they could do. Which brings me on to my next topic. There's always a lot of fear that whenever these new technologies are introduced, there's going to be a massive amount of job loss. Now, I think with the EU introducing the relevant regulations, lots of other countries will have slightly more or slightly less kind of regulated industry versions of their kind of AI regulations published. But the key thing is that people should always think of AI as being that kind of co-pilot, that assistant, that's something that's there to amplify the output of people, not to replace people. So yes, there's always going to be that potential for automation, but ultimately what we want to do is embed AI capabilities alongside a business and people, so that we can amplify what it is that people do. Now, going back to some of the problems that I discussed around potential collapse of an LLM because of its consuming its own content, other things that we have to be aware of, and so the reasons that we have to ensure there are relevant guardrails is that equally there are people out there who are looking to poison data sets, which is again one of the reasons I'm strongly advocating for people, once they have like an LLM as a model, what they should be doing is fine-tuning it to their own data set. But really what I'm super interested in is people taking this kind of capability and taking it to data sets behind firewalls and applying it to those kind of data sets so that they can deliver something that's very explicitly going to solve a problem for an industry. So Whereas general purpose capabilities are obviously great, I think the real magic comes in applying it to specific use cases in particular specific industries. Now, I was told there'd be the opportunity for Q&A. So I don't know if people are able to come off mute and ask questions or whether they can type questions um, into the chat area. But what I'd love to hear from the audience is like, are there particular challenges, fears, or questions they have around this technology, to kind of delve a little bit deeper into the things that this community is thinking about.